Happy Monday, and welcome to another edition of Mount Calvary Daily Devotions. I am Vicar Matt. Please join me in prayer. Blessed Lord, you have caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning. Grant that we may so hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that by the patience and comfort of your holy word we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life. In Jesus Christ. Amen. So today and for this week, I'm going to lead us through a study on First Chronicles. Now, at least in part, this is because this book is not normally studied a whole lot, at least in the regular lectionary, the regular rotation of readings throughout the year on Sunday mornings. And in general, it can be a little bit of a challenging book to go through by yourself without recognizing a few things, most especially the purpose and the use of genealogies and this study of history. So I'm going to start today and start our study on First Chronicles with something like a theme, some identification of why the chronicler recorded and wrote what he did, and how that is different, how it shows up as different in First Chronicles as opposed to Samuel, the books of Samuel and Kings, and other books as well. I did want to make another note about the study of history, which we'll get into perhaps a little bit after we do the readings. But it's critical to study the history, not just from the perspective of the Israelites who have their tribes named and their genealogies named in this book, but also for us, recognizing God's design of salvation through Jesus Christ, this golden thread, as I've heard and I'll share with you, throughout the history of God's people, throughout our history of humanity, God's golden thread of his promise that from Adam and Eve, he would one of the seeds of Eve would be the one to put an end to sin, to crush the serpent's head, and the serpent would bruise his heel. So let's get into the First Chronicles text a little bit. I'd like to start with chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. Again, this is First Chronicles, chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. So all Israel was recorded in genealogies, and these are written in the book of the kings of Israel. And Judah was taken into exile in Babylon because of their breach of faith. Now the first to dwell again in their possessions, in their cities, were Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the temple servants, and some of the people of Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh lived in Jerusalem. So, in a sense, we can understand genealogies from our own family histories. I'm thankful for a little reminder at the Valentine's, the sweetheart dinner we had, of genealogies, of remembering who our ancestors are, what our families are, family names, and also the stories of those family members, of where they came from, coming from Scotland and other places in the world, which helps us to guides us in a different perspective, a unique perspective for us. It gives us a little bit of understanding of who we are. And so this serves the same purpose for the Jews, for the families of Israel, and especially for those who are coming back to Jerusalem from the exile. So I wanted to read a larger chunk of text, verses 22 to 34, to end with. All these who were chosen as gatekeepers at the thresholds were 212. They were enrolled by genealogies in their villages. David and Samuel the seer established them in their office of trust. So they and their sons were in charge of the gates of the house of the Lord, that is, the house of the tent, as guards. The gatekeepers were on the four sides, east, west, north, and south, and their kinsmen who were in their villages were obligated to come in every 7 days in turn to be with these. For the four chief gatekeepers, who were Levites, were entrusted to be over the chambers and the treasuries of the house of God. They lodged around the house of God, for on them lay the duty of watching, and they had charge of opening it every morning. I want to pause here and encourage you to take note how important this gatekeeper task is. The service of the temple, but most especially those who are guarding the entrances, or you could even think of them as door holders, as we do ourselves nowadays, showing other people respect and care and love, to hold the door open for them, to welcome them in, no less to the house of God. Some of them, and I'll continue, some of them had charge of the utensils of service, for they were required to count them when they were brought in and taken out. We hear this again in the prophets. Others of them were appointed over the furniture and over all the holy utensils, also over the fine flour, the wine, the oil, the incense, and the spices. Others of the sons of the priest prepared the mixing of the spices, and Mattathiah, one of the Levites, the firstborn of Shallum the Korahite, was entrusted with making the flat cakes. Also some of their kinsmen of the Kohathites had charge of the showbread, to prepare it every Sabbath. Now these, the singers, the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites, were in the chambers of the temple, free from other service, for they were on duty day and night. These were heads of fathers' houses of the Levites, according to their generations, leaders. These lived in Jerusalem. So to start off with, as a theme and as a little overall teaching, here in these passages, these verses, we can see already some of what goes on in the rest of First Chronicles and the history of Israel. There was a time, and there were multiple times, when Israel was punished. Israel drifted away from faithful worship, and the chronicler doesn't dwell on all of those details, but it's interesting to note that he does dwell on a lot of the positive things that happen, most especially here, the return of the exiles to Jerusalem. That's a really big deal. Perhaps if you thought of it from their perspective, it may have looked like they were never going to come back to their homeland. They certainly didn't earn it or deserve it, but it's important to remember that God promised to do this in quite a few ways. And in general, you will see this elsewhere in First Chronicles, he promised to do that through David's line. Remember the root of Jesse in the prophecies of Isaiah and elsewhere, and the promise to David that there would always be a king sitting on his throne forever. These prophecies become a whole lot more obvious, more meaningful. It's easier to understand them when we study this history, which is one of the great blessings I hope to share with you in this study of First Chronicles. Let's close with prayer. Renew us, Lord. Recall us to Zion and sanctify our service by your word. Amen.